Hello everyone, welcome to the Testing Diaries channel. In this video we will learn about one of the most important components of the JMeter, that are thread groups. And in this we will be covering below topics. We will first of all learn what is thread group, and then we will see how the thread groups work in JMeter. We will also see different options available for thread group configuration, and at last we will see some tips to configure your thread group in a way to create a more realistic load test script. But before we start understanding what is thread group, let's consider a real life scenario wherein you are given a task to test your application to test your application for 10 concurrent users. So basically your load test requirement is this: you'll have to test your application performance for 10 concurrent users. So how are you gonna do that with JMeter? So the answer to that question is thread groups. We can use thread groups to create 10 concurrent users load on the application. So thread groups are nothing but the components, JMeter components, which lets us define the pool of virtual users. So as you can see, it lets us define the number of concurrent users that we want to run our test with. Apart from that, it also lets us configure like how those users will be arriving on our application under test. So will those users be arriving all at once? Will those other users be arriving gradually? So that arrival rate we can control using the thread group. Apart from that, we can also configure the test to handle the error scenarios. So let's say when your test is running and one of your requests is failing. So what you want your test script to do in that case. So that you can also configure using the thread group. And it also lets you define the duration of your test run. So that can also be done with the thread group options. Okay. We will see how we can add a thread group in JMeter. So I have my JMeter window open, and to add a thread group under a test plan, what we'll have to do is we'll have to right click on the test plan, click on add threads, and you can see the thread group option. On clicking of that, the thread group will be added here in your test script. Okay. So I'll just remove this one because I have already created one script wherein it also has the thread group. Okay. So this is the JMeter thread group, which is like divided into two sections: the action to be taken after a sampler error and the thread properties. These are two sections. Okay, and now if you remember, our requirement is to test the application with 10 users. So to do that, to yeah, fulfill that requirement, we can define the number of users or number of threads as 10 in the thread group. So your script will run for 10 number of users. So let me expand this script. So you can see we have two requests: get employees and get employee details. So this two will be executed 10 times for 10 number of users. Okay, so let's run it and see how it behaves. So if I run it, so you can see all the 10 users have been loaded to the system, and you can see all the users have been like added to the system, and the load test has been completed. Now if you notice this graph, it says that the number of active threads are nothing but users. So this denotes the number of users, and this denotes the time that has taken for the script to run. So if you notice, the all the users, like all the 10 users, have loaded to the application all at once, and this is not the way that we want our load test to run. So typically in a load test we want to load the users on the applications gradually, because if we load all the users at once, there is a possibility that your server may crash. Ultimately what we want to do is we want to achieve something similar to this. So since we are testing with 10 users, so we want to gradually increase the user count to 10, but not all at once. So if you see this graph, it is loading all the 10 users in 10 seconds time. So we want to gradually add those users, and to do that we will have to use a property of thread group that is called ramp up. Okay, if you open the thread group again, you can see the ramp up period in seconds. To configure similar behavior like loading 10 concurrent users in 10 seconds time, we'll have to define the ramp up as 10 seconds. Okay, so let's do that. So what will happen is, since we have defined the ramp up period as 10 seconds, so all the 10 users will be loading to the application in 10 seconds. Effectively, every one user will take 1 second time to load into the application. So if you divide ramp up period by the number of users, you will arrive at the number that user will take to load onto the application. So in our case, it is 10 divided by 10, so 1, and every one user will take 1 second time to ramp up to the application. Now in case we have the ramp up period as, let's say, 100, so in that case 100 divided by 10, so that is 10 seconds. So every one user will be loaded onto the application in 10 seconds. We will see this in a pictorial manner. So let's say we have this configuration, 10 users and 10 ramp up time. So if you see in this picture, the thread 1 will start at the 0th second, and after 1 second the thread 2 will start, and after 1 second the thread 3 will start, and eventually the thread 10 will start at the 10th second, and all the 10 threads will be active after the 10th second. Okay, so this is how the thread groups work. Okay, and with this we can achieve a scenario something like this. So all the users will be ramped up to the system in 10 seconds, and then they will continue running the test in a similar manner, like for the 10 users continuously. But we want to stop this particular test at some point, right? We want to configure a scenario when once all the 10 users have been loaded, we want to run the test for some duration, and then we'll want to stop after that particular duration. So this part, the one wherein all the continuous user load of 10 users are applied to the system, this part is called the steady state, and this is the most important part in the performance test. And we want to have the as longer steady state as possible, because that is where we will be measuring the application performance, not during the ramp up or the ramp down scenarios. Now to simulate this particular steady state, we will have to play around with some JMeter thread group options. One option is to specify the duration. So right now we want to run the test for 120 seconds. So let's specify the duration of the test. So that can be done by setting the value for the duration. And this will be enabled if you check the checkbox called the specify thread lifetime. And then you can set the duration. So we want to set the duration as 120 seconds. So the duration is set. Now let's run the test and see what happens. So the test has started, and if you check out the active threads over time, we can see that we are not able to achieve the 10 users load on the application. We are only achieving some 1 users load on the application, and the test is completed in 9 seconds as well, even though we have defined the duration as 120 seconds. So like, what's the reason for this? Why did it happen? So the reason for this is the loop count value we have set only as 1. So what happens is JMeter runs in loop. I mean, each user will loop through this particular requests, and since we have defined only one loop count, so each user will execute this request only once. So suppose if we run this test with one user only, and with the one ramp up, and if we keep the loop count as 1, so this request will be like these two requests will be executed only once. So let's check it out. You see the one user is able to run only uh, one time all these two requests. And let's say if we define the loop count as 2, so the JMeter will go through this request in 2 loops, like it will go through the two requests once, and then it will again go through these two requests and will display the result. So let's see. So I have kept the number of user as one, and we'll be going to the we'll be running through this loop in two times. And if you see, all these two requests will be executed two times. So this is how the looping works. And so if you define the loop as infinite, we'll be able to run the script in the infinite manner. So yeah, let's keep it as infinite, and you see all the requests are being executed. And to stop this, I'll have to manually click on the stop option, and you'll be able to stop that. So this is how the looping works. Each user will loop through the requests, these two requests, and then display the result. So this is shown in this picture. You can see we have two requests: get employees and get employee details. So this is the request one, and this is the request two. And when a thread one starts, the loop one will be executed, and that will initially call the request one. And once the request one is completed, request two will execute, and that ends the first loop. And then again, JMeter will start with the second loop. So in that case, the request one will be executed again for the second loop, and then the request two will be executed after the first request is executed. And if we have checked this infinite checkbox in the loop count, this will keep on happening till we manually stop this, or the duration value is hit. Okay, and this will happen for all the users. Like this will happen for user one, user two, and this will happen for all the 10 or whatever users that we have defined in the thread group. Okay, so this is how the looping works. So to be able to achieve the concurrency of 10 users, what we'll have to do is we'll have to keep the checkboxes infinite and keep the duration as 120. Because if we don't check the infinite checkbox, what will happen is once all the, let's say, 10 or whatever iterations that we have defined, the test will stop, and we will not be able to achieve the concurrency. Okay, so I'll keep the checkbox infinite, and we'll again define the threads and ramp up as 10 seconds. And let's run the test now. I'll clear the test results, and now we will run the test. Now you can see we are able to ramp up the users, and they are gradually ramping up. And once we hit the 10 users load, it will keep on hitting the application with the 10 users load. Okay, so this is how the looping works. I mean, each application, like each JMeter user, virtual user, will run through these loops as per the value specified in the loop count over here. So I'll just stop this test, and we'll understand some other options which are available in the thread properties section. One another thread group option is the delay thread creation until needed. So by default, what happens is when you start a JMeter script, all the threads are created at once. And in case you want to avoid that, you can check this particular checkbox. And this will come in handy wherein your ramp up period is much longer than the time it takes to execute one particular thread. So in that case, you can delay the thread creation until you really want it. So in that case, you can check this particular checkbox and run the script. Another thread group option is same user on each iteration. This one is will be helpful when we have one cookie manager added into the script. So we will learn about cookie manager in the further videos. But let's say if you have a cookie manager added to the script, so it will use the same cookie across all the requests if this same user on each iteration checkbox is checked. Otherwise, it will get a different cookie for each request. Okay, so these are the options which we can configure, like the thread properties option that we can configure for a thread group. Now we will see another section, that is action to be taken after a sampler error. So basically this will help us with the behavior wherein what will happen when one of the particular request fails in our test script. Okay. So there are like 5 options: continue, start next thread loop, stop thread, stop test, and stop test now. So you can configure it as per your requirement. So let's take an example of each of one and we'll understand this in detail. So let's say if I have selected the continue, so what will happen is, even though we have let's say noticed an error on this particular request, the script will continue with the execution and will not stop because the script has noticed an error for that particular request. Okay, so let's understand this with a picture. So we have this sample thread execution, and let's say we notice an error for request 1 itself. So JMeter will continue with the execution on the request 2 and the loop 2 as well. Okay, uh, so let's try to simulate this scenario. So I have created a dummy sampler. So this is nothing but to simulate the JMeter request, and I will intentionally try to fail it. Okay, so let's do that, and you will see the failed request over here. So I'll just display only the errors, and now let's run it and see how it runs. Okay, we can remove the startup delay, and yeah, so the script has started running, and you can see one of the requests is failing with the 100%. And even though it is failing for the 100%, the test execution is not stopping because we have chosen to continue even though the sampler is resulted in an error. Now let's take another scenario where we select start next thread loop in case the sampler error is occurred. Okay, so if we select this option, what will happen is if we let's say notice an error on loop 1, that particular loop 1 will be skipped and the loop 2 will be called. So to view this in a picture, so let's say we are on the thread 1 and we are noticing an error on request 1 of the loop 1. So what will happen is the request 2 will not be run and the control will be directly given to the loop 2, and the loop 2 will start run. And in case the request 1 for the loop 2 is failing again, the request 2 of the loop 2 will not run and the control will be handed to the loop 3, and so on. So to see this as an example, so I have selected the start next thread loop, and let's start the test. So what will happen is this dummy sampler will fail, and since it is failing, the thread will be skipped, like the thread loop will be skipped, and the new thread will be created for that particular purpose. Okay. Uh, so yeah, we won't be like visually able to see that, but you can see that behind the scene this will be happening. Okay. So I'll just stop the test, and we'll see the next option, that is the stop thread. So as the name suggests, stop thread will stop the thread itself if at any point the thread is giving an error. So let's say if we notice an error on the request 2 or request 1 itself on the loop 1, so this whole thread will not run. It will abort this particular thread, and this will be terminated altogether. Okay, so let's see how this works. So I have stopped the thread, and will run the test again to check how it runs. So right now the users have started ramping up, and all the users have ramped up, but you can see the one of the samplers has failed, and since that failure has occurred, that thread is terminated, and now we only have the 9 threads. Okay, so let's say the second thread is terminated out of the 10th, so we will have only 9 threads. Okay, so this is how the stop thread option will work in case the sampler is resulted in an error. So the last two options are stop test and stop test now. They are almost similar. I mean, they stop the test altogether in case we notice an error in any of the samplers. So, but the difference between them is the stop test will let you gracefully shut down the test. So, in case you have some of the samplers running, so those will be completed, and then the test will be stopped. But in case of stop test now, the test won't be gracefully completed. Like if you have some samplers running when the error occurred, JMeter will not care to have it completed, and the test will stop without them having being completed. Okay, so let's select the stop test and see how it works. So we have started that script, and the users are ramping up. And once we notice an error, so I think we have noticed an error, so the test will stop. You can see the test has stopped, and since it is selected as the stop test, so it will let all the samplers run which are already running to be completed. But in case we have selected the stop test now, it will stop the test immediately without caring for the running samplers. Okay, so these are all the options which we can configure to like the as an action to be taken for a sampler error. So this ends up our coverage of JMeter thread group. In the next video, we will see how we can validate the JMeter thread group, and we will also see some tips to create realistic load testing scripts using the different thread group options. Okay, so make sure you check out the next video. But for now, bye bye for my side. Have a good day and see you in the next video.